I get scared sometimes.
But as I always say,
It's okay to be afraid.
as long as you face the fear.
And keep moving forward.
Count on Regence, the name trusted in insurance since 1941. Regence Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oregon. Live fearless.
Hi, and welcome to Employee Hiring and Management in the Digital and Virtual Environment, presented today by Spencer Rockwell with SDAO. My name is Jennifer Quisenberry, and I'll be your session moderator. If you have any questions for Spencer, please ask those using the Q&A box, which you'll find by clicking the Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you would like to chat with other attendees, let the group know which district you're from, or simply want to say hello, please use the chat feature, which can be found near the Q&A option. Throughout the presentation, I'll collect questions as they're submitted and ask them of Spencer at the end. You can click the like button next to other attendees' questions to upvote them, which will indicate that you would like that question answered as well. At the end of the session, please visit the session page within the platform to complete the session evaluation. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Spencer Rockwell.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it. Can you hear me? Does that sound all right? Okay. All right. Thank you all for being here. I got to start sharing my screen. Hold on. Don't let me forget to do that. Okay. Share screen. Okay. All right. Thank you again all for being here. Or being there, or being wherever you are. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Jennifer gave me a brief introduction. For those of you who have not had a chance to meet me, or I guess the unfortunate opportunity to meet me, my name is Spencer. I'm the Assistant General Counsel here at SDAO. What I get to do for the majority of my day is help folks through all manners of employment issues and get them headed the right direction. If there's things we can do, or ultimately if we need to get somebody exited from a position, I'm the guy that you get to talk to, or have to talk to, maybe I should say more accurately. So that's my role here at SDAO. When we were talking about this presentation, or talking about presentations for conference, it was early on in this new world, this new changed remote world. And this was the topic. This hiring and management of employees was a topic that was occupying a ton of our time because it was such a new challenge, or new challenges, set of new challenges. And so when I started this presentation, or outlining this presentation several months ago, it was a different time than it is now. And so as I got prepared for this week, I went through and made some significant changes, partly because I still have the opportunity on a daily basis to talk with folks who are, I'll use the word, struggling with these issues. Maybe some are struggling more than others, but working through the challenges that we have with the remote workplace. And for those of you, this is obviously, if you're in here, more than likely you have somebody who you're dealing with remote work. A lot of our districts, as you guys know, they don't have that option. There's just, that's not the challenge. But if you're here and you're talking about, or you wanted to sit through this, you have somebody, at least one person in your organization who's doing remote work. And so that's kind of the target audience that we're here for today. So everything has changed with this remote workplace. I say that not only from the professional capacity as working with you guys, but for us. I'm in my office now. It almost feels like a place that I have forgotten. We haven't been here in so long, and it's been such a challenge. And I put in the tagline, "Are you adapting?" I don't know about you guys, but I'll share my personal experience. When this whole thing started and we began working 100% remotely, it was a very, very awkward transition for me. And it was one of those things I didn't expect. And so I struggled through that in my personal life, being at home, and the challenges that led to. And so that was why I wanted to have this conversation and discussion, because it is such a new thing for the whole world, but it's an interesting concept, and the interesting way that it has played out in the work that I do and that stuff. And so I just feel like I should say this out loud, because one of my favorite parts of my job is getting to go out and present both at conference and around the state when we do our things. And my favorite part is the interaction with the participants. And with this, I get absolutely no interaction. I just get to look at this little picture of my bald self in the corner, which is like the least satisfying part of this presentation. But a really funny friend of mine said that doing an online presentation like this is like going on an awkward first date. You just keep hoping that your jokes are landing, even though you're not getting any response. So for those of you who makes it feel like an awkward first date, I apologize. If we're being honest, a first date with me is much more awkward than this. So, all right. So, like the title suggests, hiring and managing remotely, are you up to the task? Hopefully the answer is yes, even though sometimes it may not feel that way. It can be overwhelming, and I don't want to overlook that. I don't want to overlook that concept and say that this is easy or is getting easier. It may be getting easier with practice, but it is still very challenging. And we continue to hope that the forced working remotely is going to let up sometime in the future. But I have a slide later. We'll talk about the concept. Excuse me, the concept that a large portion of the workforce, at least when they're responding to polls, are saying maybe we don't need to or want to go back to the office, and whether that's a feasible thing for your organization, we can have that discussion at a later date. So, what tools are out there? We'll talk during the presentation about tools, and then where to go for help. I want to put in a plug for our organization and the work that we've been doing. We are a great resource for help. I say, like, patting myself on the back, right? But we, all of us here at Special Districts, whoever you get a hold of, whether it's the risk folks, whether it's the HR, whether it's the legal department, whether it's Tanya and technical services, all of us have been working through these issues. And I would suggest have a good deal of experience with it now, from that area. And so if you're feeling like you're hung up, or you're kind of hung out to dry, or you're alone, you need somebody to talk with and say, hey, these are the issues. That's what we're here for. And so I want to encourage you. For those of you who heard a presentation from me before, I almost always say this when I'm talking about HR stuff. It's never too early to reach out and get in touch. It oftentimes can be too late. But it's never too early. I had a phone call yesterday morning where the question was, hey, I have these couple of issues that I have identified. What do you think I should do? And ultimately, my advice was monitor them, but being aware of them and being prepared for things that come can be helpful. And I will suggest that us at Special Districts, all of us, whoever you are working with, have a great deal of experience with this now, and can be a great sounding board if you need that. So. All right, so this is my roadmap. The things that we're going to go through, the things that we're going to talk about. I'm trying to see, I haven't seen any questions yet or anything like that. Oops, sorry. But I really, really would like you to encourage you to ask questions during the presentation. Like I said before, that's my favorite part of this stuff. And so please do that. And then Jennifer, I think, can pop in and tell me that I need to answer questions. And I would really appreciate that, because this is a topic that, depending on your organization, depending on your management style, depending on the work that you do, it can be very personal. And I'm not encouraging you to share specific details of employee issues, but talking about concepts and questions that you have as we work through this. I promise that I'll try and answer your questions. I may have to put you off if there's something that I don't know or can't get to right off the top of my head. But I love the questions, so please fire those off as quickly as possible, and get as many out going, and that will make this more interesting for everybody, I think. So, all right, so that's our roadmap. You have that. Oops, I got my face is in front of my screen, so I have to go look at my notes. The transition from in-person work like I said in my introductory comments, this was a huge shock to most folks. I don't think it was easy for anybody outside the very limited group of folks who were already doing remote work as a practice. In my experience with our special districts, there wasn't that many folks who were doing consistent remote work, and so that here I'm going to try and move something real quick. But it was quite a shock to the system. As I said, I like to think that the shock has worn off, but sometimes when I talk with folks, they're still very much in the middle of it. And that was part of why, when we talked about doing this presentation, that even though this topic, this managing remote workforce, has been taught and played out really a lot in the preceding months, I want to suggest that it is not something that comes naturally, or at least not to most folks. And so the challenges are still out there. Traditional tools that transition from when I say traditional tools from the workplace, managing employees, employee relationships, those tools aren't as effective as they once were. So, for example, the one that I have had the experience with, both personally and then in helping other folks, is the interaction and conversation that we have with coworkers. And the example that has come up over and over again is the lack of, I won't say lack of communication, but the sort of accidental communication that occurs when we're in the office. For those of you who have ever been to our office up here on the third floor, I sit 15 feet away from Tanya, who's our technical services person. Routinely in the old days, she and I would have a back and forth about a particular district or particular issue. And that was a big source of communication. We no longer have access to that. And that's one of those things that I'll say that people can struggle with. There's that informal camaraderie that comes with the workplace, that comes with being in the same spot. And that traditional tool, that communication tool has shifted or transitioned. One of the things that I've been wanted to bring up is this is a great opportunity. I know that I always harp on this, if you've heard me talk about this before, about looking at job descriptions and revisiting those. But look at the job duties that people are performing. One of the things that I've experienced in this transition is that people have transitioned or are doing different things than they once were, whether that's by virtue of the technology doesn't allow it or something like that. But there's been a shift. And so the reason I bring that up, and we'll talk about this as we get later on in the presentation, I don't want it to become, or my goal would be to be looking at those job descriptions and saying, hey, is this position really a candidate for remote work? Or is there a way that we can make it a better candidate for remote work, and transition job duties? And so this situation is a time of constant change and reevaluation. And so when I say looking at those job duties, I don't mean to question if people are doing their work, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but to say, gosh, are we being the most efficient? I sort of jumped ahead, look for new efficiencies, right? Looking at these positions, looking at the work people are doing, and having a conversation and discussion about what that looks like. Again, I'm not saying do this or don't do this, but if you're looking at a position, if you have somebody who is more suited for remote work, and look at transitioning job duties to somebody who is perhaps has to do in-person jobs, to even those things out, pick up the different bits of slack that are left, not in a negative way, but because the person working remotely doesn't have access to certain things. So that's one of those things that you have to be, or I would suggest be mindful of as you look at this. And we'll talk about the performance management piece a little further on in the presentation. I put the word deliverables up there. This is normally where I would ask people to raise their hand and give me their concept of deliverables. But since I can't see any of you, the hand raising gig doesn't work that well. What I mean when we talk about deliverables, talk about identifying what deliverables the person doing the work that you're asking them to do is actually producing. And again, that's really easy for some positions, right? The deliverable is built into or is a natural outgrowth of the position, and so that can be easier for some jobs, some positions. That can be more difficult for others, and so, and I'm not suggesting that every job has a project that you can deliver at the end of the week or something like that, but this is a time to look at what those folks are doing in their roles within our organizations, and saying, what are the deliverables? And the reason I bring that up in the transition concept or the transition slide is because it's going to be relevant when we talk about the management and the performance issues, both positive or negative, with that employee if they're working for remotely. I've said this 3 times now already. I'll probably say it more. The idea that we've always done it this way, that has been, I have suggested in my presentations before that that's never a good reason to do something. Not that historical background and information that we have from the past isn't a great tool to learn from, but early on in this, less so now. One of the issues that people were saying, they would say to me is, well, we've never done this. There's no possible way for us to have remote work. Trust you, you're not alone. A ton of people in the world said that. That very well may be 100% accurate, but they may be 100% true, but that doesn't mean that we can't look at what we're doing and see if there are available options. And so, if you can do the weird thing where you think back a little more than a year ago now and try and envision this environment, this scenario, and the changes that we've made. You guys heard it in Frank and Michelle's opening remarks, right? Our environment, our SDAO work environment, has changed drastically, but every single person here has done an amazing job of being remotely connected and being available, and we still have that same collaboration. I would suggest that more than a year ago we wouldn't have been saying, yeah, we could all never see each other in the workplace. And so I wanted to get that off the table as an excuse. We've always done it this way. That's one of my least favorite things that people say when they're trying to justify a behavior or lend credibility to it. So again, it's a hard habit to break. I know that. That's why I say it in all these presentations, but something to be thinking about as we move forward.
Hey, Spencer.
Right. Yeah.
We have a couple questions that have come in. Do you want to address those now, or
Yes.
It looks like you're excited? So
Very excited. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so the first one is, what experience does your organization or others have with using texting as a way to communicate with patrons regarding the recruitment process? Has this been more or less effective in anyone's experiences since or before COVID restrictions?
That is a wonderful question. I'm giving that person a virtual high five. That's a great question. So make sure I'm understanding, Jennifer, if I say this wrong. So the use of texting, you said patrons?
Yeah, communicate with patrons regarding the recruitment process.
Regarding the recruitment process. So if I'm understanding that question about recruitment for a position within our organization, is that what you took from that?
Yes.
Okay. Texting is one of those things that it has all kinds of really great uses, both whether it's just communicating with friends and all those things. Texting in the workplace context is not a great tool for a number of different reasons. But again, used appropriately, for example, somebody says, "Hey, I'm applying for this position." They put in their cover letter, "Email is difficult for me. Can you use texting?" Yes, there's no problem with that. I don't know that I've seen a bigger uptick in it necessarily now. From a public entity standpoint, those text messages are a matter of public record. and would have to be maintained. And that's the real challenge. Maintaining text messages and again, we could go down a very large rabbit hole, wormhole of the records retention requirement for text messages and whether that's being complied with by a number of different people. But again, there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with the use of text, especially when it's an outsider to our organization. I would suggest caution when we're using it as a communication tool between employees, especially about perhaps sensitive issues, whether it be performance issues or other issues. It doesn't tend to lend itself to that as well. So whoever asked that question, thank you. If I didn't get that right, could you please write back and tell me what I did wrong, and Jennifer will correct me.
Okay, so then our next question is from Holly. Holly asks or says, please give tips for conducting job interviews via Zoom beyond the usual etiquette stuff we all know about. Is it okay for someone outside the organization who will work with the new hire to participate in the interview as long as they keep things confidential?
I will answer that question. Absolutely, yes. And I have a slide that addresses this a little bit later on. So when that comes up, if I don't get everything you were asking for and more, please write again, and we'll talk about that. But I do have some tips on that later in the presentation, because it is one of the biggest challenges. So, all right. So, is that all the questions, Jennifer?
There is one more. What are people doing to keep personnel information secure when working from home? Not everything can be kept online, and email really should not be utilized for items such as I-9s.
Okay, so let me say it this way, and I will defer a little bit on this question. It's good to be mindful of the security issues that we face with confidential information. I'm going to suggest we're lumping in there perhaps medical information, communications like that, where traditionally, if you're, again, saying you're bringing a doctor's note about an issue, you'd bring it to your human resources department or supervisor, and that document would be confidential. This is I'm kind of going to dodge the question a little bit, because it has so many different so many different elements. But one of the big things to think about is, is your IT, are you secure in that, right? Do you have concerns about the lack of security within your own internal department? Email by itself is not unsecure if done correctly. So again, but I'm not a tech guy, so I don't necessarily want to comment on your tech department's security, but there are tools, there are methodologies to encrypt documents. There's both internal, and I say internal, I mean within one's organization, and there are external tools that can deliver encrypted messages. But generally speaking, you do have to maintain that same security that you would if you were working in the same office. More and more, however, obviously we're seeing people using electronic means to communicate all manner of things, doctor's notes, all those kind of things. And so we would keep those secure. I would encourage you to, I'm going to use the word IT audit. That's probably overstating it, but be mindful of your IT security and whether or not that's something that's being managed by somebody who's competent to give you advice on that. With one caveat, we have, certain folks are using their personal email to do district business, and I don't love that as a matter of course or practice for a lot of different reasons. But so, for example, if we have a manager who doesn't have a district email account and is receiving confidential medical information, or like somebody said, I-9s in their personal email, that presents a whole bag of challenges. So I'm going to encourage you to look at that IT component, and I'll touch on this a little bit, and we'll get back to that here in a second, I think. So, okay. Is that it for now, Jennifer?
That's it for now.
Awesome. All right. So my office phone is ringing. I'm not going to answer it and make you guys listen to me talk on the phone. So, all right. So this communicating expectations. Not done with it yet. This perhaps, and the reason I put this, right at the very beginning, this is perhaps the most critical feature of what we're having to do now as we transition or, live in a remote environment. Communicating expectations. What does it mean? That this is something that frankly I struggled with in building this presentation, because it takes on, or it could take on, a life of its own. For those of you maybe who had an opportunity, I've done several presentations over the years on employee management, performance documentation, all those things. And so as I got ready to do this one, I went back through my old lectures and reviewed those and thought, how can I translate, some of this stuff into this? And what I'll tell you, frankly, is I didn't feel like a lot of it translated very well. Of course, when I wrote those lectures 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I wasn't contemplating that the people weren't face-to-face on a regular basis. And so it was interesting to go back and see my own materials. And so as I talked about this, or as I thought a little bit about this, communicating expectations is one of those things. It takes on a whole manner of concepts. And so the easy one, see, I put easy in quotes. The easy one is communicating the expectations for the work performance, right? That's the more traditional concept of performance management, communicating expectations. This is what I expect. I expect, timeliness. I expect a certain level of quality, lack of typos, whatever the expectation for the work is that you're asking folks to do. The expectations in the remote environment obviously are very, very different. I had a question early on in this. Can we compel somebody? Can we enforce somebody working from home not being in their pajamas in their bedroom? Which is a weird thing to do on a professional call. I'll just put it out there. I've never done it. I'm not going to start. Although I thought about doing this one like that, but I couldn't find my pajamas, so that just would have just made it weird. No, but the answer is yes. The employer does have control over the work environment, the expectations, right? Like I said, you asked me a year ago, would I have ever expected that question to come up? The answer is no. But we do, the expectation is a certain one. And you can set those expectations as odd as they may come up in a remote working environment. Things that end up being funny and great memes, or cats walking across Zoom screens, kids screaming in the background, whatever, all those things. It is perfectly appropriate as the employer, when you're managing or communicating the expectations, that we communicate those things clearly, right? Things that we didn't think about a year ago, we're now having to think about and say. The big one, and this has been the subject of a lot of discussion for a lot of different reasons, but I'll just highlight it, is whether you can compel people to be on a Zoom camera, like for a meeting, right? Can we say, or can you just have them call in on the phone, whatever that sounds like, or whatever that for your organization? That's a decision that I'm saying you, the manager, or organization as a whole, would have to make. And as you can imagine, there's been a lot of issues that come out of that. I've had an issue where somebody was not doing it. They were refusing to appear on camera. It was a matter that they didn't feel comfortable about their living situation. And they didn't feel, they perceived that it was going to be an issue that would cause people to be concerned about them in their professional capacity. And so there's things like that are the outliers. I don't mean to suggest that those are common occurrences. But again, when you're in this new environment, communicating expectations about, what we expect in that remote environment are really important. So the other one, and I'll probably touch on this more than once. The other one that has become, or is a big issue, is hours of work. Again, I keep saying a year ago, pre-remote work for a lot of people, it was very easy to set expectations where you had, you were to arrive at an office at 8 o'clock, and you'd have your 15-minute breaks, you have your hour for lunch, and then you would go home. Obviously, that whole concept has changed, and that has been very difficult for people to manage that change. And so I want to bring that up, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go on. Move on to the one I have listed as deliverables. I mentioned that in the earlier slide. We talked a little bit about what deliverables are. The word I like to use is metrics as opposed to deliverables. Metrics to me is just a different way of saying how we're monitoring the performance and the work that our folks are doing. And that can be something very, very simple as we're monitoring if we have an expectation that we're responding to patrons in a timely manner, right? Get back to folks within 24 hours, within 12 hours, whatever the expectation is. Are we using those metrics to assess the performance of the employee? And so, are there other ones to use, like with the communicating expectations? There may be metrics that you didn't think were going to be relevant, that were going to be different. But again, this, like, for example, ties back into the hours of work. One of the things that people love about remote work is the flexibility during the day. Get up early, get some work done, take a break, get some work done, take a break, get some work done, where the workday stretches over a longer general time, but the work is getting done. And so when you've identified the metrics, identified the things that need to get done and the way in which they need to get done, if you're applying those to your employees and they're meeting those standards, they can be successful without the normal confines of that 8 to 5. I'll use that as the example. So this is my way of encouraging you folks, if you're looking at managing a remote employee, looking at that person and saying, are there other ways we can gauge their performance? And so, excuse me. So that ties into what tools do you use, or what tools do we use? One of the I'll call it the classic example, the traditional example that we would experience in the workplace. Employees would come, they'd do their work, they'd be, generally speaking, under supervision at the office. People would see them there doing their business, and that was kind of our tool, right? We utilized their presence in the workplace as the gauge that they were in fact getting their work done. We don't have that as a tool anymore, and so the other tools that you can use, like I said, is this concept of metrics, where the work is getting done. One of the best bits of advice, and I'll confess, this is not my advice. This is from some very smart human resources people that I talk with about this. The concept of doing goal setting, which in my experience has been done on an annual basis at your review. But goal setting meaning the expectations for the work week are set out in advance, or the work month, depending on the nature of the work that the people are performing. And so rather than saying, we'll just assume that it's getting done, right? You have a conversation, let's say beginning of the week, or the latter part of the week before, and you say, this is what we'd like to see. Or if you spend even perhaps more positively, the employee says, hey, this is what I got on the docket for next week. These are the things I'd like to accomplish. And that, if you're a supervisor in that role, does two things. It lets you know that the employee is thinking prospectively. They're thinking about the work they need to do. They're thinking about what's coming up, which is a great characteristic. But it also gives you a check-in. So when that end of that, as you, being the manager, gets to the end of that time frame, whether that's a week or a month or whatever it is, and you can hold up that paper or that email and say, gosh, looks like 75% of this stuff got done. And with that bit of information, you can engage with that employee and say, hey, why didn't this 25% get done? You can say it nicer than that, which I would encourage you, especially if there's not really any issue. Say, tell me about what's going on. Did those got bumped to next week? Employee says, gosh, this is what happened. Task 3 took way longer. Here's all the things. And you're engaging in that back and forth discussion. to me, that's a really, really great tool. Don't get me wrong. That is a lot of work. Depending on the number of employees that you are in a supervisory role for, that can be a huge burden. And so I don't want to suggest that it's perfect for everybody, but it is a tool that lends itself, excuse me, that can lend itself to sort of a successful pattern rolling forward, where if you're on this schedule where you're checking in and setting goals or expectations for the following week, you know when things are coming, and frankly, it allows you to plan. I would suggest allows you to plan for things perhaps even better than you would if you weren't using that tool. Some of you out there may be saying, Spencer, we do that already. We've been doing that for years. Good for you. That's awesome. That is not in my experience, that is not the most common practice. But again, this is my personal experience. That's something that I think could transition very, very well, even into people being back in the office environment. I just think it's a great tool. It opens up a lot of lines of communication, which is what I wanted to roll down to next. I said, how often are we checking in with employees? This is a very, very personal, I don't mean like private, I mean like relationships with our employees are very, very different. And certain employees are more engaging, some are less. Checking in, and I don't have a citation for it, although I wish I did. There was some, as you can imagine, a bunch of research being done about this concept of the remote work environment. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again was employees saying it's hard not checking in. It's hard not being sort of having that back and forth, that feedback, like I mentioned earlier, engagement, maybe is the better word. The interesting thing, as I looked more into that conversation, a lot of times it had to do with the employees feeling that they weren't being recognized, that their work was going unnoticed, which is whole nother concept of successful management of folks is acknowledging and being mindful that people like to be rewarded, even if it's just saying, thank you for your excellent work, or, this is good. And we don't have that. I keep pointing out of my office door, like you guys can see me, or see what's out there, but you don't have that. And just for the record, Tanya never says anything nice about me, so that it doesn't come from outside my door. So I just wanted to get that out there. But people sometimes they miss that, and they thrive on that positive reinforcement. And so use that concept of checking in as you're assessing your own management style or the management style of your organization and how you want to do this. Let me give one little chunk of caution on this because I've seen this backfire on some organizations where, let's say, upper level management says, hey, we want you to check in with your employees on a daily, quarterly, hourly basis. That can be a very weird directive and can actually have the reverse effect. It can alienate the employees and make them feel like they're being micromanaged. And I'll address that a little bit more in a slide later. There's no one size fits all for that concept of being more engaged with employees. So just be mindful of that. And again, it's a personal thing. It's how you relate with your employees as opposed to we're imposing something upon you. So that's one of the things. So I want to stop and say, does Jennifer, is there any more questions that have come in? Please.
There are no questions right now.
Come on, guys. You guys are better than this. Let's get some questions. Okay, then I'll just keep talking, which is great. Next one down. Can we find more flexibility? This really is a question more than anything else. The name of the game as we've transitioned into the remote environment or virtual environment is flexibility. I mean, our conference, our SDAO conference that we're at right now is an absolute testament to that, right? Of taking what is a very social gathering with a bunch of people who have a common goals and interests and transitioning it to this thing is like flexibility defined, right? You guys are all experiencing this. whether you're, I mean, frankly, whether you're doing remote work and managing remote employees, or whether you're just having to manage in-person employees with the restrictions that come with that and the challenges. Board members, the flexibility that comes with doing board business virtually, or that kind of thing. So this is really me just encouraging you, or hopefully being positive and saying, there's generally speaking, there's more room for flexibility, or there can be. I don't want anybody to hear me say, you got to be more flexible, you got to do something different. But this is an opportunity for growth professionally, certainly as you run your organizations, because it's leaders who can be flexible and incorporate these changes that can be really successful. And so hopefully more flexibility. That's my like like go find more flexibility. That it means something different for everybody. But again, I want to encourage you to reach out if you're struggling with that, ways to find that. That's a call that I'd love to chat with you about, or any one of our staff would love to chat with you about.
Spencer, we have a question.
Yes. I'll just goad people into asking questions and they'll do it.
Lynn said, I'm hoping that you'll cover how to conduct a physical skills test for an applicant that has passed the initial virtual interview. For us, it would be a lineman, climbing a pole, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just do that. I wouldn't have that later on necessarily, but I'll just touch on it right now since Lynn was kind enough to ask. So the answer to that question is actually very straightforward. If you've done a virtual process, that lineman job is not a job that lends itself to remote work very well. If it does, that's very weird. So they're climbing virtual telephone poles. It's a whole thing. I don't understand it. No, the answer is conducting those physical skills assessment tests, whether it's for the PUD context, or whether it's for fire service, or whether it's for another organization that has physical skills requirements. You do those just like you would do for a person who is coming to work for your organization. You treat that. So right now, that means all the safety precautions, making sure that you're complying with all the rules and regulations to the extent, not to the extent possible, to make sure you're complying with all the rules and regulations that come with doing in-person work. And again, you guys have suffered through this enough. I'm not gonna Jason Jancy you, as they say, and talk about the OSHA requirements. But all the things that come with doing the remote work, with doing in-person work, those would apply to the folks who would be coming on to those physical assessment or physical skills tests. So, Lynn, hopefully that gets where you needed to be.
That's all we have for right now. So I'll go off again.
Okay. Keep them coming. Awesome. Thank you, guys. The last one, and this is for those of you, I said this again, for those of you who see my presentation, this is one of my favorite things to say, identify non-negotiables. I just got finished talking about flexibility and what that looks like and how that can be beneficial to an organization. What I always like to back that up by saying, there are certain things where flexibility simply does not work, right? And it may not work for any number of reasons, but don't find yourself in a position where you think, well, I have to do something different. Spencer told me to be more flexible, so now I have to do something different. There are certain bits of work, certain things that our organizations do of any kind or of every kind, that certain things have to be met, right? So somebody had asked a question about confidentiality of information, right? It's if you have staff who's working remotely from home, that's great. It has to be a non-negotiable that they don't have employee confidential information lying around their spare bedroom with laid out on the floor in their workroom, right? We have to maintain confidentiality in that regard. That's just an easy example, but there's dozens of those for each organization, for each position. So don't find yourself in a position of saying, well, I have to do something different just because of this stuff. And so that's where there are pieces that are non-negotiable. I'm going to caution you when you're trying to find those, balance, what your flexibility is with your non-negotiables with, we've always done it this way. Those are the places where you'd be having that conversation, discussion about what exactly your organization can, I'm going to use the word tolerate. And so that's one of those things I like to back those up, because I don't want people to hear me saying that you have to do something different if it doesn't fit within the needs of your organization. Oh, Jennifer's back.
Yes.
Another question?
It looks like we have two.
Yes.
All right, so from Bob, we are in the process of gathering applicants for a GM job of a small water district. Do you recommend having all board members present at a virtual interview or just one or two board members?
Bob, I'd encourage you to work, whoever's running your hiring process, work through that. There are different, and we can talk about this offline. Feel free to reach out. There are different things. Obviously, the board members gathering in a virtual format to interview a board member would require a board meeting. And so there's all the complexities that go with that. But what I'll say is, if that's the board's wishes, that they want to interview the person all together as a group, then by all means do it. But just make sure the appropriate steps are followed, because that would be obviously it would require the board meeting notices and all that stuff that comes with an open and public board meeting. So good question. But again, I want to encourage you, I think it was Bob, if you have specific questions about that or want to talk about your hiring process, please reach out. I'm easy to find, especially in this virtual world. So please reach out and let me know if I can clarify that further for you.
Great. And then Holly says, we are all teleworking during COVID. Post-COVID, we will go to a mix of telework and in-office work. While teleworking, the home is considered to be the workplace, correct? We have a telework policy now. My question is related to liability. We can't control what goes on in the home environment like we can in the office environment. Any tips for risk management there?
Yes. And I will get to this. I've got a slide that's good. We're going to talk about that, called I think it's called the home as the work environment. I think it might even be called that. So I will get there. What I'll say, hopefully tide you over until we get to the home as the workplace slide, which is very exciting, is there are a bunch of different challenges that come with the home as the workplace. What I'll say from a liability or risk, I should clarify, a risk perspective is, I don't know that it significantly increases risk to have somebody teleworking from home. I suppose there might be situations in which it would or could, but I'm having a hard time visualizing what the additional risk factors would be. Aside from one of the things we'll talk about that it can be a concept is making that home work environment ergonomically sound. So if the people are in a position where they're spending a chunk of their day sitting down, normally workplaces are so well put together these days, and with the help of our risk consultants who do the ergonomic analysis, that's an easy step. I don't want to speak for them, but if you have a situation like that, I think they'll actually talk with you about homework environments as well. And if they tell you they won't, come talk to me and we'll have a talking with them. So, but Holly, we'll get a little bit more to that closer to the end.
And then I just wanted to give you a heads up. You're about 12 minutes out from the end of the session.
Oh, geez, that went fast. Okay. All right. So here's what I'm going to do, guys, because this next slide, the staying connected piece, this is interesting. Take a look. Oh, I think it's interesting, of course, because I wrote it. But I'm going to skip over that one. That was more just a compare and contrast. It touches on some of the stuff we've already talked about. The one thing I do want to highlight is, oh shoot, hope I have my funny slide in there. The one thing I wanted to put in there that I wanted to highlight for you is the concept of more frequent and smaller meetings. This has been something that if you've looked at this concept at all in terms of working from home, working remotely, the online environment lends itself to these quicker, smaller, topic-focused meetings as opposed to the lengthy meetings. I don't love the lengthy meetings anyway. For those of you who do, you guys are weird. But if you have a finite issue and you can deal with it quickly with the particular players involved, it's one of those things I think you're going to benefit from. But I'm going to skip over that one. Again, if you see something on this slide that you wonder what I was talking about, or catch me in one of the breakout rooms, send me an email, call me, come stand 6 feet away in our parking lot and talk about it. All right. So since I have, Sorry, guys, I didn't intend to have it go that quickly. Let me do this real quick. Nope. All right. Managing performance. This is the one, and we touched on this, some of these things, and so we're running short on time, so I'm going to go quickly through these, or more quickly than I have been. The one I put at the top, I think, is going to be the most critical one. It's certainly the one when we've had these discussions with people, we use the word micromanage. People and oftentimes employees in a negative way will say, "You're micromanaging me." And you have heard me say this if you've listened to my performance management lecture before. There's nothing illegal or wrong necessarily about micromanaging. It doesn't lend itself to a good relationship with your employees, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. But in this environment, and again, I'm having had a chance to talk with folks about this, there is a loss of, I'll suggest, a loss of control that comes with having your coworkers and colleagues next door, down the hall, downstairs. And one of my experience, one of the coping mechanisms for that is to overmanage, to micromanage in a way that can do damage to that relationship. So I want to encourage you to think about that as you're talking about managing performance. I say this knowing that when you're talking about managing performance, oftentimes it's talking about managing performance for employees who are underperforming. And that's where I wanted to drop down to these, and we'll kind of bust through them. Revise and revisit expectations. The expectation for the remote environment has changed greatly. I don't mean, and I don't mean with respect to the work or the quality of the work being performed, but this is a whole new deal. People are in a different place. They're doing different things with respect to how they do their work. So revise and revisit those expectations. As I mentioned in my couple slides ago, communicating expectations. That's sort of job one. And again, I don't like to dwell on the negative, but if and when we have to have a conversation about a possible disciplinary issue, and the expectation has, and I'll just use the gimme, the very easy one. You're saying my employee is not available. They're not being responsive or receptive to what they need to do. And I'll say, okay, have you outlined the expectation that they're supposed to be available for these times? And if your answer is, yeah, that's what they were supposed to be when they were in person, I'm going to say, gosh, I think it's maybe a good idea to have a conversation or discussion with them and revisit those expectations and clarify what it is that you're expecting from them. So the one I want to hit on before I move on, be prepared for feedback. And I say that, I said this in a different presentation one time. If you're going to ask people how they think you're doing as a manager or as a upper level manager, be prepared for them to be honest. And if you're not comfortable receiving negative feedback, don't put yourself in that position. It can be very awkward. So, but I'm going to encourage you, feedback from your employees, assuming it's delivered respectfully and appropriately, can be a masterful tool in crafting how your organization is moving forward. Let me just use the example that I keep harping on, the hours of work, right? If your expectation is saying, God, I need this person at their computer without fail, their break time issues, or without outside their break and lunch, and they're coming to you and saying, hey, I'd like to think about how we could do this. Is it possible? Can we do this to have a longer block of time, do something differently? Again, that last one, flexibility is key. If you can do it, you can do it. But remember your non-negotiables and the deliverables or metrics that you need those people to meet. This is go, Jennifer, question.
I just wanted to give you 5 minutes, 5-minute warning.
Okay, I'm going. All right, so this is, you guys have probably seen these on the news, on the internet, wherever. This is one that I just blindly stole from an article that I have been reading. 59% of U.S. workers who've been working from home prefer to continue to work remotely. There's all kinds of statistics. They're all over the board. There's more complex analysis. But be thinking about this, not for managing your deal right now, but what does this look like in the future for your current employees, for future employees who are going to maybe have an expectation of the option to work from home. We all know, we've learned painfully in some cases, working from home can be wonderful. It can also have its challenges, why we're here talking today. But this is one of those things where there's nothing to say about this other than be prepared and be thoughtful of what this looks like for your organization. I think it was Holly who mentioned they had a remote work policy. That's great. If you don't have one, or if you have an old one, get it revised. Let's talk about that because it's critical. But again, be thinking about what people are going to be expecting in the future. I'm going to skip over this one as well, with the exception of the last one that I think is really critical to point out. One of the things and one of the common themes that I've dealt with when people are struggling with managing employees is a lack of trust that the employees are doing what they're expected to do. Here's what I'll tell you about this before I move on, because I have 5 minutes, is if you find yourself in a position where you're lacking trust in that an employee is doing what he or she says when they're out and about, or working from home, not out and about, that's a performance management issue. If you find yourself distrusting or mistrusting a large group of people, or you don't trust the process, that's something you got to think about in the concept of why that is, and jump back to that, some of those expectation goal setting. Again, I said I'll touch on one, adjusting expectations. Adjusting expectations doesn't mean lowering them. It means changing them. And so you can change or alter them in a way that would allow that. There are a ton of great resources. I mentioned the internal ones here at SDAO. There's a ton of great training classes that are being put on. I know Lori Grant, the HR Answer staff, put on one about managing people. That's just one of a host. There's a ton of them. If you find yourself in a position where you might need some assistance, that's one of those things where I'll say this: if you're having a hard time trusting employees and trusting the work is going to get done, then make sure you're appropriately analyzing that or getting assistance if you need it. I'm going to skip this one because we touched on it a lot, and it's not as I don't think it's as relevant. This is my favorite meme that I like to send around because this makes me crack up. There's a bunch of different, I get all my training from memes. So you guys should know that about me. Memes and dad jokes. Those are where I get all my bits of information. So hiring in the remote world. This is one of those things that is, I would suggest, is one of the hardest things to do. And so because you don't get what we're accustomed to receiving, that in-person one-on-one interaction with the person who's going to be your colleague or coworker. So that being said, we still have to hire people. That doesn't slow down. And again, if there's an opportunity for an in-person, appropriately distanced gathering, there's that can be a concept as well. But one of the things I wanted to address or bring up when you're looking for hiring position, could the position be remote? Will the position be remote? Does it have remote capabilities? One of the things that the research is saying is that job hunters now, after this shift, are increasingly putting remote work capability on the top of their list. Not necessarily because of the pandemic, but because they perhaps have gotten a taste of how what that's like and what that flexibility. So the third one down, be clear about the nature of the work. We're not going to be hiring for a position that lives in the pandemic times necessarily. We're hiring for a position that will hopefully continue on into the future. So what I mean about be clear, I don't want to say mislead, like somebody be dishonest, but be careful or cautious about saying, yeah, this is a remote position. And then when our restrictions are lifted and we're moving successfully into the future, you all of a sudden say, no, that's not how it's going to work anymore. Be honest, be candid about that. So I'm going to say one thing before Jennifer asks me a question, because I think we have one. The last one is really, really important. The technical details of hiring are more important than ever, right? the interview, don't skip the interview. Don't skip the face-to-face interview. Don't just do the phone interview because it's easier. Again, this is not related to working remotely. More people than I care to admit skip the reference checks. They get a good feeling about the person and they say, we got this, we're in. That can be a really challenging thing. So those technical details of the screening, the interviews, again, look at your process. Everybody knows I'm a big fan of saying, look at your hiring process. That's one of those things that you don't want to skimp on right now, because it is a lot more work to do it than it once was. Jennifer, go.
We do have one more question, but I was going to encourage any more questions to either email you or reach out to you on the platform, since we did hit noon.
Please.
I know, it went by fast.
I know.
Is there anything else you wanted to say just to wrap it up?
I can't remember who asked the great question about home as the workplace. That was my last slide. This is an area that is, I'm going to keep you guys just like 2 more minutes, I promise. Keep flexibility at the forefront. That's my bottom one. I mentioned that concept where people are, you never know what goes on at people's homes. And generally speaking, in the old days, we never knew, right? People came to work, they did their work, and they went home. Remote work can open up doors and glimpses into people's life that could be weird. It could be scary, like learning things about me, or could potentially trigger issues or concerns that you might have about what's going on in their home life. It makes that difference, that separation of work and home, much more difficult. And so I think it was Holly maybe who asked the question about risk or liability. That's not as big an issue for me on the injury side as it is on the employment side. You learn information. You see, on a video call, you see that they're caring for a disabled relative. They have something, all the things that you can learn through watching a video screen that you would never know if the person just came and sat outside your office door unless they decide to share with you. So if you find yourself in a position where you've gathered information that maybe you don't feel like was something you needed or anything like that, approach those with caution. And again, this is my last little nugget before I let you guys go. Approach performance issues with tact and caution. It's working from home is not easy for people, especially if those people have a lot going on at their home life that maybe you or I don't. And so if you find yourself in a position of needing to have corrective action, put that in the back of your mind and say, gosh, is there something going on out there that maybe I need to be aware of or I need to be mindful of? So that was it. I will let everybody go. Thank you all very much. And again, please call, reach out, do our chat, our breakout rooms. I'll be in there off and on tomorrow. So I look forward to talking with you guys more.
Great, thank you. So a couple people asked about the handouts. We're going to get those uploaded to the session page today, hopefully. So those should be up there by tomorrow. And then just a couple of reminders, make sure you attend your caucus meeting today at 1 o'clock. You can access that from the sessions page, just like you got to Spencer's session. And then at 3 o'clock, we're having virtual trivia. So be sure to join that. We've got 2 different games going on, one 80s and 90s pop culture, and the other one's general knowledge. So the other thing too is make sure you fill out the session evaluation, which you can find on the session page as well. And of course, if you have any questions, just reach out to us on the attendee connections page.
Thank you, guys.